Hey readers, this is Liz from Beyond Solitaire Books, and I'm here with Sara Ronis, who is one of my absolute best friends from the bad old days of grad school. She is a professor and an expert on demons in ancient religion. How are you doing, Sara?
I am good. I'm pumped about today's discussion. Also, it's just lovely to see your face, right?
I know, normally we would have hung out at some point over the holidays, but thanks, COVID. But Sara and I both love to read, shocker. And we thought we would come on here to talk about our top 5 most influential books or series from when we were younger so that we can just like wax nostalgic and swoon over the books of yore.
Oh, the books of yore. Yes, it was super fun to like think back to my youths and these like amazing series. Now, I will say though, I did want to start with just a caveat, which is what I tried to think back to what books were actually really influential for me as a kid and not what amazing YA books exist in the world today. So for all kinds of systemic reasons, the books that I read as a young adult were largely white, largely set in like either a fake Christian world or a real Christian world. And their authors were also largely white and straight and cis. And I think if you were doing this with somebody who was maybe 20 years younger than me, hopefully that list would be a lot more reflective of the reality of the world we live in.
Yeah, that's something that I noticed about my own list too. So my current reading, I actually make an effort to read diversely and to try to incorporate a lot of different viewpoints, authors from different parts of the world, authors from different backgrounds, but that was not enough of a consideration when I was a kid, partially because I think that, frankly, I'm 34 now. So we're talking about like the 90s, basically. Things have really changed for the better since then. Sometimes it doesn't feel that way. But there was not, at least from what I remember, an effort to really diversify reading, including in the classrooms that I went to school in, the book fairs that we went to. Oh, do you remember book fairs though?
Scholastic.
Oh, Scholastic book fairs.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to think, where did I get these books from, right? And they came from one of two places, either the school library or books that my mom loved and then like passed on to me. And the books that my mom loved and passed on to me were things like Little House on the Prairie, which is super problematic and racist, and I would not read to my children. And then other books like from the school library, which, my school librarian, who was probably about my mom's age in the 90s, was sort of drawing on the kinds of books she felt were important. And I think, quite frankly, we should have done better back then.
Yes.
And like, I am actively and intentionally working to do better now. But, the prompt was which books were actually really influential in your life. And so I want to flag there are so many really amazing YA authors who are people of color and queer and from a range of socioeconomic backgrounds and religious backgrounds and religious identities. And so like today there's just tons.
Yes, it actually did get better with time in this particular case. We're talking about the bad old days. But so actually,
yeah,
I think it's really funny you mentioned that your mom picked up a lot of books because like a lot of these books honestly are books that my mother looked at for me and thought would be good. And other than the overly whiteness of the selections, my mom had excellent taste. And I'm really glad that I had a mother who put a lot of really good books in my life. But I think that now we would all do even better.
Yeah. And, trying to think about what was about those books that I loved.
Yeah.
Like there are so many authors who are doing some of the same things that I loved today, but inflected and depicting a world that actually matches the world that we live in. Right. So I think if viewers are watching this and are like, I want to do all of those things. First of all, read these books. But then also there are a whole bunch of other really amazing books written in the last 20, 25 years, which do similar things in a more intentionally representative way.
Absolutely. And Sarah, I know you have a list of some of those, which I will be putting in the show notes. Also, if y'all are watching and you have some ideas, I like comments, so please leave them.
Excellent.
So,
Yeah.
Without further ado, what was your number 5, Sarah? You're the guest. You can go first.
Okay, so one more piece of context that's super important for viewers who don't know me is that I am Canadian. I mean, that's going to be really clear on this list. So my number 5 series was the Emily of New Moon series, which is I know. So Ellen Montgomery, who wrote the Anne of Green Gables books, she had a bunch of other books too. So this is a trilogy that she wrote about, so it's Emily of New Moon and then 2 others, about a girl named Emily who lives in Canada and wants to be a writer and has a romance and is just like fantastic and weirdly supernatural. It was like an intro to Gothic and romance and girls who want to be creative and more than their society lets. And oh, it was wonderful. I owned this set of books as a trilogy. I read them so many times that they fell apart. I bought them again. Oh yeah. And you know what's really interesting about this? I haven't been able to bring myself to read them since I was a teen. I'm like so worried that they won't hold up.
Oh, yes.
I cannot bring myself to read them. Every other book on my list, I've read multiple times since then. This one, like it had such a place in my heart, but I haven't, like, if it's not as good as an adult, it will break my heart.
You know what? I can completely get that. It's also interesting you talked about rereading things until they fall apart. I don't do that anymore, but man, did I do that a lot when I was younger. I reread a lot more as a child than I do as an adult.
I mean, as an adult though, I can go to the library when I want to, not like when my parents are driving there.
That's
right?
True.
And I have a Kindle, so if I run out of books, I can download one. And for those readers who aren't in their 30s, there was a time without Kindles where you had to read books in paper. And
yes.
When you were done with the ones in your house, if your parents weren't going to drive you to the library, you just had to read them again.
I actually got my first library card because my parents used to take me to Bookstop when I was good. See, my parents were smart. They like convinced me that reading was a reward early on, and I'm so glad. But I used to get to go to Bookstop when I got all A's or when something went well. But my parents would buy me these books on a Saturday, and I'd be like done by like Wednesday. And so my dad got me my first library card because he was like, "We can't afford this."
Yeah, I mean, I loved the library, but again, right, like the library had the books that the librarians at the time chose, which were books that reflected their childhood.
Yep.
So,
and there's also like wonderful. What you can find as a kid too.
Yeah. Also, right, like I didn't know there were books not in the library when I was very young. Right, like this was this magical place with all the books. Did you know there were books that librarians weren't buying?
I didn't. I had no awareness of that at all.
Right.
But so I like that you talked about your number 5, by the way, as something that is about a girl kind of pushing against society, because my number 5 is also that. So my number 5 is Catherine Called Birdy by Karen Cushman.
Oh my gosh.
Have you read that one?
Yes.
It's so good. So it's about basically this, it's a historical fiction piece about this girl who doesn't want to get married, and her father's choosing all these just terrible suitors, and she finds ways to get rid of them by acting horrible, and it's just so delightful, I think, for a kid to read. And like I'm pretty sure I have a very strong memory of something being on fire and her dad trying to pee on the flames to burn them out.
I don't remember that, but like
that sounds like something that would have happened in this book. But Catherine Called Birdy, I think, was the first piece of historical fiction that I really fell in love with. And it had a good, like, strong female lead, somebody who's very willful. The fact that my mother selected this for me probably tells you a lot about the child she was trying to raise.
Yeah.
But it was funny, and it was witty, and it was contemporary while also being historically set. And I think that was a tastemaker for me for a lot of future books that I would read when I got older. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally.
Like, totally. I think a lot of the choices that you make later about what you're interested in are based on things that caught you when you were young.
Yep. And it's also really interesting because putting this list together, I thought about that some more, and I was like, I didn't even know that these planted some seeds, which then led to totally other stuff, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. When we get to my number 1, you're going to be like, well, that makes sense.
some of ours are going to overlap. Just like given our shared taste in reading and from like having been friends for so long, I feel like there might be a couple on this list. Not the like uber Canadian ones, which might overlap.
You and your Canadian books. No, I actually kind of want to read that series. Maybe I should read it and then tell you if it's good.
Yes. I mean, because some of her stuff really doesn't hold up, right? Like she was writing in the 1910s and 1920s in Prince Edward Island, and like the xenophobia is strong in some of her stuff.
Yeah.
But then other stuff is just like really still holds up. So
yeah, but like I remember being, you mentioned Little House on the Prairie. I remember being entranced by those books when I was younger, and now I'm like, ooh, that was probably not so hot.
Yeah.
But talking about good stuff, number 4.
Okay. So I really, really struggled with the order for 3 and 4. So I don't actually know which one is 4 and which one is 3, but I'll just pick one. But like I went back and forth many, many times. So my number 4-ish is the Wild Magic Quartet by Tamora Pierce.
So good.
So for those of you who haven't read them, they're about a girl named Dane who has this magical ability to interact with nature and animals, and sort of her adventures and learning to harness her magic for all kinds of really, good things. And as someone who like loves my dog very much, I feel like that right, like you've got the whole like school piece, right, because she's learning things and hello professor nerd who likes school. You've got the like animal piece, there's a romance, which as an adult today is like actually super troubling, but like I didn't think about that as a kid.
Yes.
Right, like it just had so many things that I just loved at the time.
Oh yeah, I actually reread it. So I reread it when I was preparing to take the praxis for middle grade literature back when I was like thinking about what to do after grad school. And I still really enjoyed it. Like, yeah, some elements were problematic, and we'll be talking about other series later by the same author, but I thought the Wild Magic series was so good. I read it multiple times as a kid.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, right, like reading this stuff as an adult, right? So in your intro, you pointed out, I'm a teacher, right? I'm a professor, you're a teacher, right? Like things that seem sort of like normal in terms of kids crushing on their teachers when we were like students. Yeah. I think we now both recognize just how toxic and inappropriate that is.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't know about you, but like, I don't find it flattering when I get the sense that like students are crushing on me. It like makes me very uncomfortable, and I like think it's appropriate.
Yeah. No decent teacher is going to be sitting there like welcoming an advance from a student, especially a teenage student, just like partially, I work with teenagers every day.
Any age student.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Power dynamic, right? Like I grade you. I get to decide your grade in this course. I have so much power in this situation that like it just,
It can't ever be an even playing field. It can't ever be a true consensual relationship.
Right.
So yes, this is Wild Magic by Tamora Pierce. My number 4, okay, so this is the most obvious classic kids book that I could think of. I feel kind of embarrassed. No, I'm not embarrassed. I love this book. Everybody loves this book. My number 4 is Where the Red Fern Grows by Wilson Rawls. Oh my God. So, okay, I cry at stuff all the time now. Like I will cry at commercials now. What changed? I do not know. I used to have a heart of stone as a child, but Where the Red Fern Grows is the only book that just had me sobbing as a child.
I've never read it.
What? It's a dog story. You know why I cried, because you've read enough dog stories to know what happens when you have a dog story.
Like, and you'll like none of the ones that I like are sad, right? They're all like uplifting and funny. I really see reading for me as escapism, and so like, oh my gosh, it's like Bridge to Terabithia. Never read it. Heard it was sad and was like, nope, noping out of that one.
See, I like really gut wrencher books if they're done very well, but I do have to balance it out. So like, it'll be like, ooh, I'm gonna read this really depressing thing. Oh, romance time. Let's binge like 5 or 6 romances, and then I can go back. But Where the Red Fern Grows, if you haven't read it, you really should, unless you really can't handle the tear jerkiness. But it's basically about this kid that gets these 2 hunting dogs, and he just really develops this incredible relationship with them. and they go on many adventures together, and then they're dogs.
I mean, I love me a dog.
Yeah.
But
let's just say they're very protective of him, and with rough ending. So it's been years since I really read it, but it made such a huge impression on me that I still have like visual images of reading. Like, do you know how like sometimes you read a book and it plays like a movie? Mm-hmm. Like that's one of the ones that has stuck with me from childhood. And that's a really big deal, I think.
Yeah, actually, so my number 3 plays like a movie in my head. I mean, I can actually like, also, let's be honest, why are these not movies? Like, right? Like, why are every single one of these, plus the books by the authors that we're going to put in the bottom, right? Why are they not movies, right? Rather than taking some like old classic and then trying to make it feminist and diverse, why not take books that are already feminist and diverse?
So I would watch a movie version of Wild Magic.
Like
a show.
Only watch a movie version of Wild Magic
with adjustments.
Well, with adjustments, but like also if the people who were running it were people that I trusted. Like actually the author, Tamora Pierce, I follow her on Twitter, huge fan. Like literally she is the only author as a kid. I wrote her an email being like, I love your books. You know, because
did she answer?
Right? No. But like also this was the height of like her work, and I'm sure she got thousands, but like she's so great and so active around issues of representation. Like if she was involved, I would watch it.
That's
if
fair.
she, right, like, you know, but yeah, like every one of these, like the next one on my list, so number 3 is The Blue Sword by Robin McKinley.
Ooh, that's a good choice.
I know. And like, if you want period pieces, this is all of that. So The Blue Sword is about a girl named Harry who gets sent to what is a colony of an empire, which is like pretty clearly supposed to be British inflected, right? So she gets sent to this colony, Damar, where her brother is stationed to like hang out with him. And while she's there, she gets kidnapped by the, I'm trying to be as vague as possible, right? She gets kidnapped by the king and council of the indigenous people of the kingdom. And it's again, right, like fiercely feminist, and there's lots of sword fighting. I mean, the book is literally called The Blue Sword. And there's romance, and there's a colonial uprising, right? And like thinking about power and indigeneity, and so good. And also like you want a piece with like great period costumes and some pretty intense magic, and like, I don't know, like there's some drugs in there and some sex in there in ways that are extremely appropriate for young and impressionable readers. It's just so good.
I actually like that you said that too, because I think that, so I teach kids, I teach high schoolers. You know, there's so much that I cannot talk about with them as a professional adult in the room, but that doesn't mean that they're not thinking about a lot of non-classroom appropriate topics. And I sort of feel like they need books with good representation of those topics to read, so that they can kind of get that feedback and get that experience without actually going out and having an experience that they should not have at their age.
Well, and like at some point in everybody's life, you may end up having experiences that are not the experiences that you knew about when you were 12.
Yeah.
And this is also, I think, a blueprint to what you deserve.
Yes.
Right? I mean, I was many years ago talking to an older woman about romance novels, and this is somebody who at the time had been married for many years, and had a number of children, and had recently started reading romance novels. And she was like, I wish I had read these earlier so I would have like known what to ask for, like what I deserved.
Yeah, like if you don't see good relationships on the page, how do you know what a good relationship looks like? And that also feeds right back into our conversation about wanting our reading to be more representative, right? Because how do you come to understand and respect and appreciate people that you never even see?
Yeah. And I think, you know, especially for us growing up, before there was really this like robust internet culture, this was the way that I encountered people who weren't in my school.
Yeah.
Books. Like there wasn't, I didn't have a cell phone. I was basically only watching the stuff that was on TV on like the 3 channels that my parents who refused to get cable had, right? Like, you know, my awareness of diversity was Family Matters. Like that was it.
Yeah, I mean, books were my world, and in many ways, they were my social world too. I was super nerdy and like definitely an outcast as a kid, and so obviously I've become a reasonably well-balanced adult. But but when I was little, you know, I was lonely a lot, and I didn't have a lot of interactions with other kids. And, you know, I don't mind. I'm an introvert as well, so I don't really mind that. But books were the blueprint for human relationships for me for a long time because I didn't have actual human relationships to practice on.
Yeah. And I think they also, right, like they also depicted friendships in a way that were a helpful model for me.
Yeah.
Right. Like, yes, there are toxic friendships in books, but for the most part, they are called out as toxic at some point.
Right.
And like
that happens less with romance, and that bothers me actually. Like I feel like a lot of romances in books are in fact toxic. Like I used to love to read Beauty and the Beast retellings. That's a messed up romance. But, you know, toxic friendships I think are less tolerated in young adult literature than toxic romances are. And that's something that I'd still like to see change a bit more. Because, you know, basically we're inadvertently, I think, teaching our kids to deal with a lot of things in their romantic lives when if it was a friend, we'd be like, get a new friend. That's not okay.
I mean, I have to tell you, it's not just kids. I was like literally talking to somebody last night who was like, I feel like I'm trying to be as vague as possible. He was talking about a situation that was making them anxious, a social situation that was making them anxious. And they described that situation. And I was like, I don't think the problem is social anxiety. I think the problem is that situation is toxic and your brain is telling you to get out.
Yeah.
Like, the problem isn't that you are anxious, right? Your brain is actually telling you information. It is trying to communicate with you something that is actually really like, I mean, anxiety is legitimate, but like something that is a genuine reflection of what is going on and not your brain catastrophizing.
Yes.
And like, you know, we learn to dismiss our instincts or our feelings in all kinds of ways. And I was like, no, your brain is telling you that this is not a dynamic that you are going to benefit from being a part of.
Right. Like your body's alarm system is working.
Yeah.
Don't shut off the alarm and be like, it's nothing.
Right.
It must have been the wind.
Right. It's normal for people to treat other people like that. Right. Like it might be normal for some people, right? That might be a dynamic that some people thrive in. You clearly do not. Right.
Yeah.
Otherwise you wouldn't have called me and been like, you know, is this anxiety?
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of things that reduce anxiety, so my number 3 is like the ultimate comfort read series for me still. And it's the Redwall series by Bryan Jacques. Oh man, I used to love those books. I think The Bellmaker is probably my favorite of the lot. But so if you've not read Redwall, everyone, get to it because it's adorable woodland creatures who have an abbey and they eat delicious food and they get into serious conflicts and they have wars, but they also have really strong friendships. And it's just such a lovely world. And, you know, I still enjoy sort of anthropomorphic animal stories. And I like Mouse Guard, like the graphic novel. And, you know, there's a whole bunch of different, you know, iterations of this. But for me, Redwall is like the original, like kind of pseudo-medieval, cute animals. This is probably also around the time that I saw Robin Hood, like the Disney Robin Hood.
With the fox?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
That's such a good movie too. The only thing that I look back on, so it's really funny that like I would absolutely read the heck out of Redwall again if I had all the books again, because they were just really fun. But I quit reading when I realized that the books were starting to basically be the same book over and over and over again, because the series goes on long enough that I kind of felt like, I'd be like, wait, this doesn't feel different enough from the other ones anymore. The other thing that I do have some concerns about with that book is that it's definitely like certain species are good and certain species are bad. So like all the stoats, like stoats are adorable. So I did not know that stoats were cute because I just read about them as the bad guys that hang out with the evil pirate rats in Redwall. And then I looked up a picture of a stoat and I was like, they are adorable. How could they be bad?
Wait, I don't know what a stoat looks like. I'm Googling.
It's like a weasel looking animal. They're adorable. Like I'll put
cute.
Right?
Oh my God.
I'll put a picture up for everybody. But, it's interesting to look back and think like, oh, well, this kind of animal, good, this kind of animal, bad. And it also made me more willing to be like, oh yeah, it's totally natural to have an evil race of orcs in Lord of the Rings later. And like, those things that kind of pop up in Dungeons and Dragons later. And like, I'm not going to totally toss out The Joy of Redwall as a comfort read because I look back on that and think, But I do look back on that and think, I'm not really so sure that was like the best.
Yeah.
But the world building and like the animal culture and just the sweetness of it all, I will never, reading those books was a major deal in my childhood. And, the buzz I got from reading something so nice and comforting will basically stick with me forever.
That is completely unsurprising given like our actual, like, that makes complete sense to me given like knowing you outside of YouTube. Like that makes complete sense.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So just so y'all know, I ended up writing my dissertation about monks. I like abbeys. I really do. Anyway.
Yeah. No, like it makes total sense to me.
It's either that or dirty poetry, which definitely was not a childhood influence. So. Nice. Oh man. So what was your number 2?
Okay, so going back to being super Canadian, I don't actually know if you've heard of these. So this is a series called the MacDonald Hall series by Gordon Korman.
I have no clue.
Oh my gosh. So they are a delight. So I don't know whether what was on his like book jacket was correct because, but according to his author bio, Gordon Korman started writing the series when he was like 11 or 10. He started getting them published that early as well.
Oh, wow.
And so they are books about school adventures by somebody who is in school. So he still writes for kids and for YA. He's got a bunch of newer stuff that I haven't read. But this series it's also called the Bruno and Boots series, and it's about these two best friends, Bruno and Boots, who are at a very prestigious Canadian boarding school, MacDonald Hall.
Ooh, boarding school, that sounds up my alley. Continue.
Yeah, and so it is very white, it is very wealthy because it is set at a prestigious boarding school in Canada. It is the funniest thing. Like, it is so funny. Those were my absolute comfort reads as a kid because they are exactly like what you would think absurdity would be when you were 12.
Oh.
Right? Like, and it's not like body humor. It's just like so funny. And then in the later books, they get more involved with the girls' school across the way. They're just like, they're sweet, right? They don't have an edge. They're not mean.
Yeah.
But they are so funny. And it's not humor at the expense of people. And even the villains are really fully fleshed human people.
Right.
They're the funniest things. If you have not read them, youths of YouTube, go forth, find these books because they just brought me hours of joy. And if they don't hold up, tell us because, that's important to know too.
Yeah. And then what would be the replacement? Because I feel like, so many books are set at at school because it's just the human experience, you know, like we learn stuff, we do it at school. School novels are always going to be in.
Yeah. So wait, what was your number 2?
So my number 2 is the Song of the Lioness series by Tamora Pierce. My number 1 is different, but it was a really close one because so we'll just talk about it together. I love the Song of the Lioness series.
So much.
So if you have not read it, it is about these twins, one of whom is named Alanna. And Alanna wants to become a fighter, but that's not something that women are allowed to do in her world. Her brother, Tom, wants to be a sorcerer, and that's something that his parents don't want them to do. So they basically switch places because they look alike, except for that they are different genders. So Alanna just cuts her hair and like goes off to night school.
Well, they're like 10 when it starts. So they don't have to worry about like growing in body shape in the same way they would have.
Right, exactly. But they are still, because so this is something I like about kids literature too, though, is that at 10, they feel comfortable making these big decisions and going off and having these big adventures. And that's something that I don't think that most 10-year-olds get to do, but you want to think that you could at 10, if that makes sense. And so, and then throughout the series, Alanna grows and she becomes much stronger, and her relationships are depicted in these really healthy ways. Like, this is the first book series where characters had sex and I really understood what was going on. Like, I totally looked at one of my mom's like romance novels from the grocery store when I was a kid, but I was like, what is this?
This is the first series I can remember where characters had sex that was preceded by conversation about consent.
Yes, and there were precautions taken about pregnancy.
And in ways that were still like deeply romantic, right? Yes. Like, consent didn't get in the way of the romance. It built the romance because you could see the like way that their relationships progressed.
Yes.
This is also the first series I ever read where there is an extensive discussion of periods.
Yes.
Which like is both very funny in the book and also like super important, right?
Yeah. I mean, it came up in like, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. But that book never hit home with me like that. But this series did, because I respected everything Alanna was doing. And so as she grew into a woman, I was like, oh, that's how you could do it and also be a badass.
Yeah. So my mom's name is Margaret. So Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Like, just never connected. Like, I can't, like, it just, the name was too much, right? Like, I didn't want to read about a girl named Margaret who wanted breasts and periods. Like, no, thank you.
Well, I remember being so weirded out by like, I must increase my, I was like, wait, what is this? I want to read about girls that stab things. And so of course, then I had Tamora Pierce there to have my back. I also
stab things. It's also like, she has really healthy friendships with guys.
Now, yes, she does.
Just for context, right? Because for those who haven't seen them, because she's impersonating a guy for at least the first part of the series,
right?
She only really knows men. So she's got these like very healthy relationships with guys, as friends. She develops really healthy relationships with women as mentors, and then later as friends. Yeah, and like, I don't know, they just were so good.
They were so good, and also it was the first series that I ever read where the path of the romance change in ways that, so basically, sometimes relationships, people really love each other, but stuff isn't going to work out for various reasons. And the series confronts that and has her make choices about her future life and the life that she wants that are really grounded in who she is and not just who she loves and wants to make happy. And that was such a good template for me going forward and think about relationships.
That was my least favorite part. Right. At the time, as a romantic, I was like, the first person who you lock eyes with across I was going to say ballroom, but like sparring field is going to be the one. But like, also you're 10 then. So of course it's not the one. And the ways that like that gets navigated, right? It's not just a question of who do you love? It's who is going to enable you to be the best person you can be, and who are you being able to be the best person that they can be? And
Right.
that might not be the first person that you love. Also, it might be, right? Like there are lots of other characters in the book, but that it doesn't negate the love, and
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that you can't still have people in your life.
Yes.
Yeah,
it also really showed a healthy blueprint for like, if things don't work out, you can be friends with your ex.
If things don't work out and the relationship was otherwise healthy, you can still be your ex.
But it does show those healthy relationships. And I think that was the other thing that I really liked about it, because, you know, I look at so many depictions of relationships, even just in like movies about adult relationships, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's always like, oh, that trashy ex, I hate them, but you're different and I love you. You know what I mean? This was a much more messy, complex thing where you respected everyone involved in their needs. And I think that was really a great set of themes that, and you know what, guess what? Teenagers, right? We were what? God, how old was I when I read this? I was young.
I think
late elementary, early middle school.
I think I probably came across them when I was like 11.
Yeah, right about Alanna's age in the first book.
Yeah.
And I think it goes to show you that it is possible to write on themes like that for kids that age, if you do it right. And Tamora Pierce did it right in this series.
Yeah. I mean, it's so grounded in her trying to figure out who she wants to be, who she can be, where she sees her ability to contribute to the world, and the people who are part of her life as that happens, in ways that are just so wonderful. And I will say, for those of you who've never read these, the series that was my number 4 pick, Wild Magic, is set in the same world as the Alanna Quartet, and the characters in the Alanna Quartet do show up in that world grown up. So like all. So if you're interested, start with Alanna and then go to Wild Magic, but be aware of all of the caveats that we dropped.
Yeah, I would say that between the two series, Alanna is the less problematic of the two.
Oh, 150
by a wide margin.
I mean, in terms of everything. Yeah. Now, I will also say, right, like she's been interviewed about the choices she made in Wild Magic and has said she would never make those choices again. Right. I do think we want to recognize that those books were written 20 years ago, when lots of parts of popular media still thought things were acceptable that are very clearly not.
Yes.
And were never acceptable, but are now more recognized as such.
Yeah, it's something that we're more culturally aware of now than any of us were at the time the books were written, and that we would have been reading them. But
and I'll say one more thing just about the Alanna Quartet, which is that in each book, and this is true of Wild Magic as well, they're sort of traveling around the universe. And so this isn't one of those books for me, which feels like, everyone is kind of the same. Right. This is the series for me, which shows some like really interesting, continuing to develop the world in every book in a way which I really appreciated. In retrospect, I actually think probably if I read The Woman Who Rides Like a Man again, some
she spent some time with like some pseudo Bedouin people, for context,
in ways that like I think now as a more sensitive reader, some of those stereotypes would really bother me. It should bother me. I don't think it undoes the importance of the series for my childhood, but I do think.
Yeah, I think if I went back and read that again, I might find some issues.
Yeah.
Not like series destroying issues necessarily, but things that make me think like, oh, I would maybe like discuss this if I had a child and gave this book to them now.
Yeah, well, and I think, I think it's okay to have problematic faves. You just like, there needs to be some intellectual honesty about the things that are actually problematic.
Right. It's not like they're perfect. Don't at me, I have
things that I love that are problematic. I have to be honest about that and like think about why that is. Wait, so what was your number 1? So
you're not going to be surprised at all. It's from the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil Frankweiler by E.L. Konigsberg.
Yep. No,
So if you have not read this book, go read it immediately. This book is fabulous. I don't care how old you are. I don't care how young you are. It's so good. It's about this little girl and her brother who run away to live in the Metropolitan Museum of Art because they're mad at their parents, and they stumble on an art history mystery that they end up solving about like a sculpture. But the book is about so much more than that. It's about agency and about keeping secrets for yourself and like enjoying, the things that regardless of what other people think, and about kind of developing as a person. And it's just so good. I cried when Konigsberg died because I also love A Proud Taste for Scarlet Miniver. But from the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil Frankweiler, like my mom brought that home, and I am certain that book impacted the rest of my life. Because what did I do? I worked at a museum in college. I majored in classics. I went on to do some like archaeology later in life, and all of that started with the idea of, wouldn't it be so cool to live in a museum?
Yeah, it is interesting, right? Like listening to you talk about your 5, you can see the threads, right? This interest in independence, right? The ways that people are learning about independence and figuring out who they are and what healthy relationships look like and how to keep learning in the world, right?
Yeah.
Like, and how to be a badass, right? Like,
yeah. And that's something that our picks share. And I also noticed that both of our lists have a lot of people we have a lot of smart women who are in school or doing some sort of training, because that's obviously been an enduring interest for us on both sides of the desk. We like things that involve kind of adventure, travel, a world that's bigger than just here.
Yeah. And I also think, right, like certainly with most of the books, I think on both of our lists, there's a real grappling with different kinds of power.
Yes.
Right? Who has power? Who doesn't? Who should have power? Who shouldn't? How do people take power in a society where they may not be granted it, right? How do you take power for yourself over your own life? I don't mean like take power in a coup, right? Like how do you take power over your own life in a world where people aren't just going to give it to you?
Yeah. Like how do you become your own boss? How do you get agency? How do you command enough respect to do what you want?
How do you learn to respect yourself when you don't fit with what other people think is respectable? Right. And I think you see that in the Alanna books or in the Blue Sword, but you also see that in things like Redwall.
Yeah.
Right? How do you develop internal value for yourself? I think what's interesting is like most of the series that I named, and I think most of the series that you named, the family relationships, right? They're not really about biological families. They're about found families. They're about building families. Some of them have biological families that aren't really present, like in boarding school. But I think in most of mine, the parents are not really in the picture.
Yeah, in Catherine called Birdy, they're very much in the picture, but they're also part of the problem. So.
Right. Sort of thinking about like, who do I want to be my family? Who can I rely on? How do I continue to integrate those people who I am biologically connected to in my life while continuing to build out my circle of care?
Right. And also like to what extent do I have to meet my family's expectations, or am I allowed to thwart that? And I think most of the books that we chose.
That was huge.
Oh yeah. And so, that's actually, it's interesting. Like, I think back to all the Nickelodeon and stuff I used to watch even though. And like, I think a big theme when we were younger was like things that you can do without adults. Adults are bad, kids get together, y'all can do things. And I don't know if that's still the same vibe that our children's TV is sending off to kids now. But I feel like that was a message I really got from books a lot, was that I could be my own person and do what I wanted to do and still have a good relationship with my parents.
Yeah, well, what's so interesting is, so I had 5 authors I wanted to recommend who are modern authors, and all of them depict much more intertwined families where the parents and siblings play a much bigger role in the story in ways that I would I would argue are very healthy, right? Like they're not, right? Like they're parents who want their kids to be the best version of who they are, not necessarily who their parents think they should be. Part of me wonders if that's generational, right? Like, is that like our parents were raised to be a certain way, and then the next generation of parents were raised to be a different way, and so they showed up differently in books? I don't know.
I feel like that's an interesting study that somebody either has done or needs to.
I mean, there is research, right? Like,
yeah.
Be like my professor nerd for a minute. There's lots of research about the way people who are currently 18 to 22 and like traditional student college age relate to their parents relative to the way that people who are traditional student college age, 18 to 22, related to their parents 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Right, like in all kinds of ways. So I'm sure that exists in the world. I don't want to do that study, but I would love to do that study. So if you know that study about YA books, put that in the comments too, because I would read the heck out of that study.
Yes. All right. So why don't you give us the authors that you did want to recommend, and then that's a good place to stop, I think.
Oh, amazing. Okay. So the first is Elizabeth Acevedo. She's a poet and a novelist, and she has this great book that I loved called With the Fire on High, which is about a young Latina girl who is a teenage mom. So she's in school, she has a 2-year-old, she lives with her grandmother, and the kinds of adventures that she has. And I love this book. So, it's about a girl who has dreams and who loves her family. And this isn't one of those books where like a teen pregnancy ruins your life, right? Like this is a girl who has a baby in high school and has a really powerful, thoughtful life going forward in ways that I thought were awesome. The second is Justina Ireland. Her series, have you read her? I feel like you would love it.
No.
So her series, the first one is Dread Nation, and it's about an alternative universe where after the Civil War, everything was good until the dead started to rise as zombies.
Ooh.
And it is about a young African-American woman who is being trained to be a zombie, protect people from zombies. It's got really great LGBTQ representation, talk about a girl who is a badass killing zombies. There is mysteries. Not everybody's who you think they are. So highly recommend that.
Nice.
The one is Darcie Little Badger. So she just wrote her first book, which is called Elatsoe. And it is about
I've seen this cover. Tell me about it. It looked great.
It's so good. It's so good. Like it's fun. It's kind of light, but there's a real romance. So the main character is a girl named Elatsoe, and she is Lipan Apache. So she and her family is indigenous right there in Lipan. And so for those of you who don't know, I live in Texas, and those are the native peoples indigenous to Texas. And Elatsoe is a teenage girl. She's ace, and she is wants to be a detective and has a mystery to solve. And there's magic and really cool stuff. And she has this amazing friendship with this guy who she knows, and it never turns romantic.
For once.
I know. I mean, listen, I love your romance. You know, and I know how many romance novels I read, but like not every guy I'm friends with.
Right.
Like,
Right. I like interactions between men and women that don't end in romance sometimes. Most
yes.
of the time.
Also, like, I'm tired. I can't date everyone I know.
Right?
Like sometimes I need to sleep. Okay, so the next one is Benjamin, I don't know how to pronounce his middle name, Alire maybe, Sáenz. And he wrote the book Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe.
Ooh, that sounds good.
It's great. It's about these two guys who are best friends, and maybe they're going to be more than that, and their adventures and growing up and figuring out who they are in the world and who they want to be separately and together. So highly recommend those. And then the last one that I suggested is Intisar Kanani, who is a YA fantasy writer, who just read all of it. They're so great. Her books are just really thoughtful. Again, thinking about like how to relate to family and be a person in the world. And she is someone who's really open about like her own connections to family. And so like the people in these books help each other be better, which is really, really lovely. So those are my 5, right? Like I would say be aware of all of the ways that the books that we suggested are problematic, also still our faves. But then here are 5 authors that if I had read when I was younger would be on my list.
Absolutely. You know, you read a lot more YA than I do. I've kind of been giving up on it, but now maybe I have a reading list too. Yes.
These ones are phenomenal. They're so good. I mean, I will say, right, like it really just depends. And I'll be honest, right, like in our current moment, I haven't really wanted to read very much serious fiction. I feel like the world is serious enough.
That's fair.
But like, who wouldn't want to go along with a beautifully written story about a teenager learning to have adventures while taking care of her 2-year-old and never questioning that she is deserving of a happy ever after? Who wouldn't want to read that?
I want to read that now. So I'm going to go look up some of those books now with some of my Christmas money. But
love it.
Yes. But Sarah, thank you so much for coming on my channel and agreeing to do this with me. It's been fun just to catch up, but also because you're a book nerd of the highest caliber, it's just good to have you on.
Thank you. Lovely to and thank you. It was nice to see you. It's nice to see you.
So anybody who's watching, if you've got questions, comments, just, definitely let us know below, and happy reading, everybody.